Yeah, hi guys, good morning. And in today's session, we'll talk about config maps, secrets, and what is taint and tolerations, as well as node selectors. Okay, so we have these different objects. What can be used in Juveria? Juveria has generated. So what can be used basically in Kubernetes clusters? Okay, so let me share my screen. Hope my screen is visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is my master machine. So let me connect to my master. My keygen is in downloads. Done. Okay, so if I'll do kubectl get nodes, then we can see one master and two workers are up and running. So let me check if we have already running any pods. Kubectl get pods. Get pods -n test, because yesterday we have seen about namespaces, right? So one is running in test namespace. So let me delete this as well. So kubectl delete and next test. So let me delete my namespace. Okay. So now I don't think so we will be having anything in our cluster. So my cluster is empty. Okay. So as part of today's concept, so we'll talk about config maps. Okay. So what is config map? Any idea? Why do we use config maps in Kubernetes? So basically, config maps in Kubernetes are used to store non-sensitive data. Non-sensitive data means it can be something related to your URLs or else your any variables. Okay. So what happen is, if you want to inject something to your pod, okay. So for example, if you want to add any variables, for example, like if you have two different pods, so let me do this. Okay, in one cluster, this is our pod, okay, and then we have one more pod. This is our DB pod. Okay, so here in this DB pod, there will be one database endpoint, right? So what we have seen in RDS, so there will be one database endpoint. Okay, so what will happen? This database endpoint. So basically, this needs to be connected to our app pod for the communication. I mean, the app pod can be communicated with the DB with the help of the endpoints, right? So while working in Kubernetes, what will happen is how this pod will be getting these details. So what is your endpoint? Okay. So for example, either I can directly hard code it, or else we can create something called config maps. Config maps. Okay. And then I will be storing my DB endpoint. Okay. And this DB endpoint will be mapped with my pod. I mean, I will be injecting this DB endpoint into the app pod. Okay, and from here it will be communicating with my database. So what will happen, for example, in future or whenever this URL has been changed, basically this pod has been uh, destroyed and one new pod has been created and we have got one new endpoint. So what we need to do, we need to integrate the endpoint in all the pods related to our application. If we have config maps, the only thing what we are going to change is to update our endpoint in the config maps. This is the only thing what we are going to update, and these updates will be reflected in all the pods. Okay, so this is the main purpose why generally we will be using config maps. So config maps can be used to store any user details like usernames, okay, as well as any database URLs or any other variables which we want our pod to get that environmental variables. Okay, so now here if you see this, they provide a way to decouple configuration from application code, making it easier to manage and update configurations without redeploying the application. So basically, if there is any configuration change, then what we can do, we can just make the changes in our config map, and this will help us without deploying our application again and again. Okay, so basically config maps are something which will help us to store any data related to our application. I mean, any configurations. It can be usernames or it can be any database URLs. Okay, so how to create these config maps? So we have 4 different ways to create these config maps. So one is from literal, and then from file, and then from directory, okay, and then from env.sh. Okay, so these are the 4 different ways where we can create our config maps. Okay, so before creating config maps, we need to understand that we need to follow 2 processes. Okay, so first one is to create config maps. Okay, and second is to inject config maps inside pod. Okay, these details, whatever we have mentioned in our config maps, that needs to be added or injected inside our pods, right? So these are the 2 mandatory steps what we need to do in order to create config maps. Okay, so first is to create config maps, and second is to inject these details inside our pod. And how many type of config maps we can create? We can create 4 different type of config maps. Okay, now if I'll do here kubectl get config maps. Okay, here we can see there is one config map which has been already created, and this is a default one. Okay, and this is something related to the certificates. Okay, so now if you see this kubectl API for resources grep config maps, okay, then we can either call it as config maps or a CM as well. I mean, the shortcut for this is CM. Okay, and here it is 2 means this can be used in namespaces as well. Okay, so we can either call it as config maps or we can execute this with the help of the shortcut name, that is CM. Okay, now let me try to use the shortcut kubectl get CM. As of now, we don't have any config maps, and this is the default one. Okay, so here we have discussed about 4 different ways. So all the 4 goal will be same. I mean, it will help us to create the config map only. There is some slight difference in each process, so let us see that. Okay, so let me use this first. Okay, so this is something related to from literal. Okay, so if I'll paste here, so kubectl create and then CM means config map, and this will be the config map name. So what I will do, I will just change this to the name called literal. This can be any name, guys. So as per our convenience, we can provide the name. So in my case, I'm using the name same as the process what I'm trying to execute. Okay, and then hyphen from literal. Okay, so basically literal in the sense. Okay, so in general terms as well, literal in the sense. Currently we need to pass that. Okay, so what we are doing is from literal, and then I'm passing database IP and then the IP address. Okay, if I'll hit enter, let us see what will happen. Config map literal has been created. So if you want to get the details, kubectl get CM, then we can see one literal has been created. Okay, -o wide. Okay, still the same details. Okay, so what happened now? One config map has been created. Now if you want to describe this to check what details this config map consists, so kubectl get kubectl describe CM, that is literal. Okay, here you can see this is under namespace default. The name is literal. As of now, we don't have any labels or annotations. Okay, and in this data section here we can see the variable as database IP what I have passed. Okay, and this is the value. Okay, so when we do describe, then we can see the complete detail of our config map what we have created. Okay, so what we have did, we have stored one variable. Okay, Now let me do one more thing. So kubectl. Now I want to delete this config map. So whatever I have created, I just want to delete this. How to delete? Kubectl delete config map and then literal. Okay, config map literal has been deleted. So if I'll do get config maps, so nothing will be available. Okay, so earlier what we have did, we have used only one variable to store, that is database IP. If suppose we have one more variable, database IP is one variable and I want to store one more value as database underscore user. So what we can do, we can store that. Okay, kubectl create config map, then config map name hyphen from hyphen literal equal to the variable database underscore IP equal to 192.168.0.1. If you want to pass one more value, then we can use space hyphen. Again, I need to use this literal equal to database underscore user equal to, for example, techie. Okay, so we are trying to store two different values. One is database IP and one is database underscore user. And if I'll hit enter, then one config map has been created. Now if we'll do kubectl describe config map and then the config map name. Here we can see two different values, database IP, this is the value, database user, and this is the value. Okay, so this is how we can store our values in config maps by using -m, -fn from -literal. Okay, so now the problem here is, if suppose we have 10 variables which needs to be stored in our config map. So what we can do, each and every time I need to add -from -literal. Okay, so the command will get very lengthy, right? What will happen? The command will get very lengthy and that will be very difficult for the users as well to update this as well. So what we can do is, we can generally go for another way of creating config map, that is from file. Okay, so that's the reason we have different options in config map. So if we have more than 10 or 50, for example, values, then it will be very difficult for the user to create config maps by using from literal option. So we can go for from directory, sorry, from file. So in file, what we can do, okay, so I can create one file. Okay, in file, what I can do is I can create one file. For example, the name of my file is application.properties and I can add all the properties. So let us see that. Okay, let me close this. Okay, so let me create one file called application.properties, username equal to Vicky, password equal to there are 123, and then db underscore user equal to techie. So these are my different variables. Okay, so db underscore ip equal to 192.168.0.1. Okay, so these are the different variables what we have stored. So what I will do, I will write all the 50 variables over here. Okay, so once this file is ready, if you see ls application.properties, then I can use kubectl create config map and then the name. Okay, so this time I will use the config map name as file because I'm trying to inject this as file, right? Okay, so file and then -from -file equal to file name application.properties. Okay, one config map file has been created. So if you see this kubectl get cm, then here we can see file and the data injected is 1. Okay, and it has been created 7 seconds ago. And earlier we have created literal and the number of data is 2. So what happened is, earlier how many values we have injected? We have injected two values in our config map. So right, so it is mentioning as two, but whereas in file it is considering all the properties as one file only. Okay, as one object only, or as one variable or values. Okay, so if you'll do kubectl get, sorry, kubectl describe, and then cm config map, and then the type. And here we can see application dot properties. This is the file, and here we have four different details, but this is injected as only one variable in file. Okay, understood? So this is how we can configure multiple values in a single file, and that file can be added inside our properties file. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and now if suppose you have multiple files, if you have one file, that is okay. If you have multiple files, for example, let me create one more file. Okay, test.properties name equal to test. Okay, so here I'm mentioning only one variable. Okay, that is name. So now we have two different files. So what I can do, I will use same command. I will add one more hyphen from file equal to the file name, that is test.properties. So I need to change the name. Okay, so I will, this time I will configure as two file. Okay, now if you see the description, kubectl describe config map, and the name of the config map is two file. Here we can see from file application.properties we have these details, and from file test.properties we can find these details. Okay, similarly if we have 10 files, but still if you see this kubectl get cm, the number of data is still one only, because this is injected as only one file. Okay, so now, sorry, in this case we have two files, right? So we can see the number of data equal to 2, means two different values. Okay, so now if suppose we have 10 to 15 files, again it will be very difficult for us to pass this, right? So what we can do in that case, we have something called from directory. So we can configure each and everything in the same directory, for example this way. Okay, so let me create one directory called properties. This can be any name. Okay, so now let me move my two files, that is application.properties as well as my test.properties, into the file called properties. Okay, so okay, now if I'll do move to properties, if I'll do ll, here we can find two different files. So this time I will use the same command, kubectl create config map, and then the name this time I will configure as directory. Okay, and then hyphen from file equal to directory name. Property spelling is also okay. Okay, let me go one step back. Okay, so this time this has created one config map by using the complete directory. So in that directory, what I can do, I can configure my 10 or 15 files, and I can pass the directory name itself. Okay, now if you see kubectl get cm, here we can see directory as the data as 2, because we had two different files, right? So if you will describe this, kubectl describe directory, describe cm and directory. Here we can see application.properties and test.properties. So this is also almost similar to file only. Okay, if we are passing two files, then we can see the same data. There is no difference. Okay, if you are passing any spaces and all, even that can be seen over here. See, we can see spaces, we can see all the values. Okay, so this is how we can create with the help of directories. Okay, now the final one is .env assets. Okay, so let me create one more file. This time this will be env.sh. Okay, user underscore name equal to the key, and then user underscore password. This will be DevOps at the 123, and then let me use one space. I have added one space wantedly. Okay, so let us see what will happen in view.sh. Okay, db underscore id, sorry, IP equal to 192.168.0.1. Okay, so we have three values here. So how to create this? kubectl create config map, and then the name. This time I will pass as env. Okay, -f1 from -env -file equal to env.sh. If I hit enter, one config map has been created. Now if you see kubectl get cm, then here we can see. Okay, here we can see one config map with the name called env has been created, and the number of values here we can see as 3. Okay, so if I'll describe this, kubectl describe cm, that is env, then we can see username as the key, password is DevOps, DB underscore IP as IP address. So what happened here? It has removed all the spaces, and each value it has stored as one data. Okay, so that's the difference between file and env. कौन कौन है? Power गया. Okay, that's 2 minutes. There is power off. Guys, we'll wait for 2 to 3 minutes. There is power off, and they're trying to rejoin. Okay. Okay, so I think we are back. Yeah, these guys are joining. So let us continue. So where were we? So basically, so what we have did, so I have created one config map with the help of env.sh file. Okay, so for that we'll be using the parameter called -f1 from -env-file. So when I'll create this, and when we'll try to get all the details, right? See env, if suppose we are trying to pass three values, and I have added some spaces as well, but still here we can see this has automatically removed the spaces, and it is considering only the three values. Okay, so whereas in file it is considering the value as a single property, I mean single value. Okay, whereas in literal, if you are passing two values, then it will consider as number of data equal to 2. Okay, so that's the difference how this can be created. Okay, now here if you see user password DevOps at the rate 123. So what is happening? It is coming as a plain text. This is not something what we are expecting, because I don't want the passwords to be revealed to anyone. This needs to be encrypted. Okay. So as of now, we have a different concept for that in Kubernetes that we call as secrets, but in config map that is not possible. Okay, but even we are not passing any passwords in config maps. This is just to show you guys I have passed some parameters as passwords in config maps. Okay, so this is not recommended, so do not try to pass any passwords in config maps unless it is for learning purpose. Okay, now we have created different type of config maps. So if you see this kubectl get cm, so we have created one directory based, one environmental properties based, one file, okay, and one literal, and one two different files. Okay, so this is how we can create config maps in our Kubernetes. Now, so we have completed task one, that is to create config maps, and the second task is to inject these config maps inside our pods. So while injecting, again we can inject this in two different ways. One is by using env, I mean environmental variables. We can inject as environmental variables, or inject as file. Okay. So we can either inject as env, and we can inject as file. So again, we have two different ways how we can inject our config maps into our pods. Okay. Now let us see how we can do that. If I scroll down, so if suppose you want to create any YAML file, okay, for example, we have used the imperative commands, right? So I don't want to use the imperative commands, but I want to create my config maps by using YAML file. So the best way to do that is by using -o YAML. So this is one of the commands. So what we have seen recently as well, right? So what this will do, this will try to create one config map, I mean one config map with the name called config map. Okay, and then we are using from literal, and this is the database IP, and I am trying to just do the try run, okay, in -o YAML. Okay, and I am trying to store this in the file config.yaml. So if I'll hit enter, and if I'll do cat config.yaml, so what will happen? So here we can see one YAML file which has been created. And now I can customize this YAML file. For example, vi config.yaml. Okay, let me remove that line. Okay, so this is the type of literal how we can create the YAML. So we can use one more. This will be database user, for example, take. Okay, and the kind will be config map, and the name for this config map will be config map only. Okay, so if I try to create kubectl create -f config.yaml. Okay, one config map has been created. If you see this kubectl get cm, then we can see one config map has been created by using YAML by -f from -literal type. Okay, now if I'll do this kubectl describe CM, the name of the CM is config map only. Sorry, config map. Okay, so this is how we can create config maps by using YAML file. So this is one of the example for literal. Okay, if you want to use file, the best way is to always get the YAMLs by executing these commands. What will happen is by default it will create one YAML file for us, and we can make the modifications as per our requirement. Okay, or else we have already created, right? So let me check this if this is possible. kubectl get CM, kubectl describe CM, and then env -o YAML. This will not work for config maps. Okay, so try to use these commands and create your own YAML files and try to create config maps by using YAML as well. Okay, so I hope you guys can execute this and try to create different config maps. Okay, so same process. I mean, earlier I have used imperative commands. Now what we have used, I have used declarative object configurations. Okay, by using one YAML file. Okay, so try to execute this, and then we'll talk about injecting these config maps in pod. So as we find our config maps in two ways inside our pod, one is as environmental variables and one is as files. Okay, so now we have created our config map by using env, that is --- from -env.sh. So let me copy this YAML file for my pod creation and let me explain this. So this is my pod YAML file. Okay, API version is v1, kind is pod, metadata is first pod, labels is environment :pod. So this is something what we have seen from day one, right? So I don't think so you guys will be having any questions on this. Okay, and this is the specifications related to our container. Here this will be using Nginx container. Here I have added one more thing, that is image pull policy equal to never. So what will happen if I'm trying to use this policy in my pod file, so it will not try to pull the latest image each and every time. Means whenever this pod is getting started, so with the help of this will not pull the latest image. If there is any image available in our local machine, then it will try to use the same image. Okay, so this is just to avoid interactions with internet each and every time when this pod is getting started. Okay, so this is not mandatory for config maps, but as I mean, I have forgot this, so I thought let me add this over here. Okay, so as part of config maps, then we have something called env variable. Okay, and then -name. Okay, so the name of the variable what you want to configure, variable from CM. So this is something what we can see inside our pod. Okay, and then value from config map key references, and the key is variable2, and the name of this config map is env. Okay, so let me save this and let me try to cat. Okay, and let me use kubectl get CM. Here env is nothing but my config map name. Okay, and the variable2 means kubectl describe CM env. Here if you are seeing something called variable2, for example this is variable2, so this is what I am expecting over here. Okay, but in my case this should get failed because there is no such variable in env, right? So let us see that as well. Okay, so what will happen if I'm passing some wrong variable key name? Okay, so in key, which variable value you want to store? Okay, and then name of the environmental variable. This is something what we can see on our pod. Okay, so now let me try to create one pod. How to create? kubectl apply -f and then pod name. What is my pod name? I mean YAML file first.yaml. And if I'll hit enter, see what is happening. Error when creating first YAML pod first is maximum. Okay, so yesterday we have created some resource quotas, right? So resource quota. I need to first check if you have any resource quotas to our default namespace. Memory max. Okay, so okay, see here one resource quota we have created. Okay, let me check. kubectl get but here I'm unable to see anything. Okay, let me do one thing. Okay, so kubectl create and create namespace test. Let me create one namespace by calling it as test, and let me make it as default. Okay, so namespace as default --- config, I think, right? So let me check that command. Yes, so this is our command to make our test namespace as default, because I don't want to pass each and every time -n and test. Okay, okay, modified. Now let me create one pod kubectl apply -f and then first.yaml. Okay, so one pod has been created. If you'll see kubectl get pods, then we can see something error is over there. Status is not ready because there is some error. So let me check kubectl describe and then first pod, describe pod and then the pod name, right? Here if you see container library is present, but error config map env not found. So what happened? kubectl get cm kubectl get cm. The config map what I have passed is not available. Okay, we have created our config maps in default, and this I am trying to execute in my test namespace. So that's the reason it is throwing error as env not found. So let me try to create one env. Okay, so we already have the YAMLs, right? So let me use this YAML. Or else let me use that command only. Both are same. kubectl create cm. Name of this should be env --- from -env -file equal to env.sh. Okay, one config map has been created. Now if I'll see get pods describe. Okay, kubectl get cm. Now we can see one env has been created. Now let me describe this kubectl describe. I just want to check the values. kubectl command kubectl describe cm, that is env. Okay, so we have dvip, we have username, and we have user password, right? So now let me try to create one more pod. kubectl delete pods --- all. So I have deleted that existing pod. Now let me try to create one new pod. Let us see what will happen. This time also this should get failed, because if you see this, our YAML file what we have used to create pod. Okay, here I am passing the key value as variable 2, which is not available. Here we have the values as dbip or username or user password. Okay, so this should tell us that variable 2 is not available in env. Okay, so let us see what will happen. kubectl apply -f and then first.yaml. One pod has been created. If you see get pods, then this should be in error status. So if we'll try to describe this, describe pod, then we can see that couldn't find key variable to in config map test. This is the namespace and env. Why? Because there is no such variable what we have tried to use, right? So let me again delete my pod. Okay, let me make changes in my YAML. So what variables we have? We have user underscore password. Let me use user underscore name. Okay, so let me use this. So vi here the key, which key it should select. Okay, so from this file env, this should select the key called user underscore name. Okay, now if I'll save this, okay, before making this change, let me make this change as well. Okay, instead of variable from cm, so I will write this name as well. Okay, so I will write this name same as user underscore name, because I just want to identify with the same variable name, or else what will happen, it will show as variable from config map. Okay, so let me save this. Now if I try to execute my YAML again, okay, if I let me clear this, if I'll do kubectl get pods, then here I can see one pod is up and running. So now I want to check. Okay, so how can we check? Kubectl exec -it, and then the pod name, that is first pod, and then bash. Now we have logged into this pod. Now if I'll do env, hit enter, then we can see all the environmental variables. Here we can see the name pod user underscore name equal to 10. Okay, so this is how we can inject our config map variable inside the pod. Okay, so in my case I have injected only one particular value. If you see this first.yaml, here I have injected only one particular value, that is user underscore name. If suppose you want to inject one more value, then write one more key and then the name. Okay, so here we have example as well. So inject config maps. Okay, if you want to inject multiple values, then you can use this. Okay, so variable from cm will be the name, this is variable 2 and this is variable 1. If you want to inject all values, then what we can do, without specifying, if suppose we have 10 values and we want to inject all the values, then we can use env from. Okay, the config map reference and only the name, no need to pass any keys. Okay, so same YAML, let me use this again. So let me delete my existing pod first, or else let me make changes. First YAML, a second pod, and this will be my second container. Okay, and here I will be passing as no need of this username. Let me comment this. Okay, and let me comment these keys as well. Okay, so basically what I'm trying to do is environmental variables from, okay, config map reference, and the file name or the config map name will be env. Okay, right? So env from config map reference. So values are also not required. So let me do one thing. Let me delete them. Okay. So once this is done, now let me try to create kubectl apply -f and then file.yaml. What happened? Pod inversion cannot be handled string specifically env from. Okay, there is some issues in my YAML. syntax error. Or else let me use this Visual Studio. Better to use Visual Studio, it will automatically display everything. Okay, so this is the error over here. So let me remove this from config map reference name equal to env. Okay, so let me copy and let me replace. Okay, so let me save this now. Now if I'll try to apply kubectl, apply F1F and then first.yaml. Command not found. Okay. Okay, one second port has been created. If you see kubectl get ports, then we can see two different ports which are up and running. So how to check? Kubectl xcc -it and then second port and then dash. And then if I do env, then we can find dbip has been configured, as well as we have user password is also configured, and the username is also injected as an environmental variable. So this is how we can inject the complete environmental variable files. Okay, so if we have 3 or 4 variables, then we can use env from module, or sorry, env from, okay, and then we can map this reference. Okay, hope this is clear. So same config map we are trying to inject in different ways. So that's up to you which way you want to use. Okay, whether you want to use whether you want to call a single variable, okay, or you want to call multiple variables. That's up to us. Okay. So what we have seen injecting of config maps as environmental variables. Now we can see how can we inject our variables as file inside our pods. Okay, so let me copy this YAML. So if suppose we need to copy the variables inside a pod as a file, then we can use config maps as files. Okay, this to be copied in terms of volume. So basically we also need to have volumes for this. So as of now I haven't covered about volumes, so but still as part of this exercise we will see, but later on when we are working on volume, then we will get more understanding on this. Okay, so let me copy. Okay, so let me paste here. So here what we can see, so this is something related to the pod, okay, in a image, and the only change is volume mounts. So basically, so what we are doing is inside this container a directory called /config will get created. Okay, and inside this, so basically this is something related to the name of our volumes. I'm configuring as test. Okay, and the behavior will be only read only. Okay, and this is something on our config map set. I mean, wherever we have installed our Kubernetes, okay, the config map, and this is the reference. Basically what I'm trying to do is whatever is available inside env, I mean 3 variables we have inside our env config map, right? So the 3 variables should be copied as a files, not as environmental variables. This to be copied as files inside my pod. So let us try to execute this and see what will happen. So before this, let me delete my existing pods. Okay, kubectl delete pods fnf and all. Okay, delete it. Now let me execute this kubectl create -f and then files.yaml. Slide number 18. What's the issue? Basically, there is one extra space here. Okay, so if I'll save this, now if I'll try to execute this, one pod has been created. So let us check the status. kubectl get pods. It is running. Now if I'll try to connect kubectl exec -it, then first pod slash dash. Sorry, kubectl spelling. Okay. Now we have logged into our pod. So if I'll do env, then here we will not be able to find any environmental variables because this time we have passed as file. So where we have passed, we have created one file, one directory called config. Here if you see, we have one directory called config. So cd config, and let me clear this. If I do ll not found ls, we can see three different files. Okay, if I'll do cat db, see 192.168.0.1. So this was the value. So if I'll do cat username, then we can see techie root. So this was our, sorry, techie was our username. Okay, and then we can use cat user password. What was the file name? Okay, then we can see DevOps server@123. So this is how we can copy the variables as environment, as files inside our pods. Okay, so if I'll exit, and if I'll see kubectl describe cm environment env, here we can see three different values: dbip, username, user password, and this has been copied as a file inside our pod. So if you want to inject any specific variable, basically you don't want the complete file, but you want a specific variable, then you can use items and key and then the path. Okay, so what will happen, it will copy only a specific variable inside your container. So try to execute this, then you will understand what happened. Okay, so this is all related to config maps in Kubernetes. That's pretty simple. So basically just remember that config maps are something which are used to store some non-sensitive data. Non-sensitive data means it can be your usernames, or it can be your DB URLs, or any other environmental variables. Okay, that's clear. Okay, and then we have secrets in Kubernetes. So earlier what we have did, what I have did is user password. Here you can see the password is printing as DevOps123. This is a plain text which can be easily readable, right? So what will happen now? Anyone who will use describe over here, then they will get to know the password of my ID. What is the password? They will easily get to know that. But since passwords are something which are very sensitive, so I don't want to expose them. So this should be in encrypted format. So this should be encoded in base 64. So in Kubernetes, in order to achieve or encrypt any data, we can use secrets. So we can say, okay, secrets in Kubernetes is used to store small amount of secure data like passwords. Small amount of secure data means what should be the minimum small amount or the maximum small amount? Okay, that should be up to 1 MB. So any file up to 1 MB can be stored as secret in Kubernetes. Beyond 1 MB, this will not support, and we need to go for config maps. Okay, and 1 MB is more than enough to store the password because we can see only in KBs only. Okay, so the maximum size for a secret in Kubernetes can be 1 MB. Okay, so whenever we try to create any secret, okay, so what will happen, so it will get converted, okay, it will get converted into base 64 and stored. Okay, so what is base 64? Basically this is a kind of encryptions which will get configured to our files. Okay, and Kubernetes is using base 64 kind of encryptions. Okay, and again in secrets we have three types. One is Docker registry, one is generic, and one is TLS. So this is something related to our Docker hub credentials kind of thing. Okay, this is important. Okay, but as of now let me talk about generic. So the most commonly used will be generic, so let me cover on generic only. Okay, and one we have TLS, means TLS is basically something related to the certificates. Okay, so again here, in order to create our secrets, we have same four ways what we have used in config maps. One is from literal, one is from file, one is from directory, one is from env.sh. Okay, and we can inject our secrets as environmental variables or as files. Okay, both are same. I mean, for config maps we were using four different type of process to create config maps. Okay, and for secrets as well it will support the same four features. Okay, even the YAML is almost same, the only change will be the secret reference. Okay, so now let me try to create one secret. So I will be using only one example. Okay, and let me show you this. For example, let me create one name. Okay, by using -- from -literal. Here the name will be secrets, but before executing let me show you something. So there is no shortcut for secret. Okay, so resources grep secrets. Here if you see it is blank, means there is no shortcut. If you want to access your secrets, then you need to write complete. I mean, we need to write as secrets only. There is no shortcuts. Okay, so if I'll do kubectl get secrets, no resources found in test namespace. Basically, there are no secrets in our namespace. Okay, now if you want me to create, then we can use kubectl create secrets. So earlier what we used to use config map. So here secrets, and then the name of the secret, for example literal. So this is the process what I'm trying to use, right? So I will be using as literal -from -literal equal to name equal to Saber. So if I'll hit enter, let me see what happens. From -literal. Okay, we can get the help as well. So if you are not aware of the exact command, then use -help. Then we can see some examples. Okay, so okay, so we need to pass the type of our secret. So in my case, I'm using generic. So as I have said, we have three types, right? So I need to pass the type of my secret as well. Okay, so which we have missed secrets. Okay, create secret. The type will be generic. Okay, and then the name will be literal -from -literal name equal to server. What happened? Okay, so basically kubectl creates secrets. I was using secrets, so that's the reason it was throwing error. Okay, so now what happened, one secret has been created. So if you want to list kubectl get secret, okay, here we can see one secret has been created. The number of data means the number of values is 1. So similar to what we have seen in config maps as well. So if you want to describe this now, kubectl describe secret return. And if you'll hit enter, here we can see data name equal to 6 bytes. Okay, 1 2 3 4 5 6. So this is not mentioning any details over here. This has been encrypted now. Earlier, what used to happen whenever we were trying to describe our config map, for example, kubectl get cm. So describe cm env. So here we used to see the detail, what was the value as well. But here we can see the variable name, but we cannot see the values. So this is how the secrets are getting encrypted. Okay. So now, if you want to create more secrets, I mean, if you want to create from file, we can use same command, same concept. There is no change. Okay. Instead of config map, we will be passing as secret. Okay. So this is how we can create. So now if you want to create any YAML file, okay, or else if you want to know the name of my value, what I have saved, okay, for example, GTL get secrets, okay, so so here we can see as literal, right? So this is something literal. So for example, the value what I have used was Abe, right? So if I am trying to convert this in base 64, so this is how it will be looking. C2FIWYL. Okay, so if you want to cross check, then let me just show you this. Okay, -o by ml already existed. So -dry -run equal to client. Okay, see the name here. Basically, if I wants to write any YAML file for the iPhone from iPhone literal, so this is how my YAML will looks like. Okay, so what I have did, I have just converted this into one YAML to see how this can be stored in terms of YAML file. Okay, so here under data section, this is my variable, that is value, and the name here it is printing as C2FYWLB. Okay, here also we can see the same name. Basically, if you want to add something, okay, for example, echo -n, okay, you want to store the value as tricky, okay, and then base 64, no space. But hit enter, then we can copy this value, okay, and copy inside this YAML. For example, now let us see what will happen. Okay, so YAML file, right? So let me copy this. Okay, so let me copy this value because I want to change my value from Zabe to Techie, right? So this is how it needs to be printed in base 64. Okay, so let me copy this and let me save this. Okay, now if I'll execute this YAML file, what will happen? What will happen if I'll execute this YAML file? One secret with the name called literal with the value as techie in encrypted way will get configured, right? So this will get configured and then I can inject this to my pod. Okay, so already we have our variables. I don't want to create one more secret. So but if you want to write any secret, or if you are not able to understand what needs to be passed, because here when I'm trying to execute as Saber, it is executing, it is creating one secret, and if I'm trying to execute, we are unable to find the detail. But when we want to write any YAML file, what we need to write over here. So no need to mention the name as Saber. So before executing, you need to check what should be the output when we are trying to convert this value into base 64, and you need to copy this over here. Okay, so this is how you need to convert the values in base 64, and then you need to copy that values in your value section. Okay, understood? థమ్స్ అప్ లో ఆపేయండి, అన్మ్యూట్ చేసి చెప్పండి, అర్థమైందా లేదా? అరుస్తూనే ఉన్నా అప్పటి నుంచి నేను.
The output will be Saber.
The
The
output
second
will
one.
be second one output will be techie because I have encrypted that to techie. For example, what I have did with the output called name equal to Saber, I have created one sample YAML file, right? So if suppose this value is getting changed to Ashfaq, for example, Ashfaq, right? ASHWAQ. So this should be the value in base 64. If you want to cross check, then we can use this command echo hyphen n, and then the value name, what we have passed, ASWAQ, and then 5 base 64. Hit enter, then you can see the same value is getting printed here. Okay, so this is how you need to check each and every value. For example, you want to store any password. For example, earlier what we have used, DevOps or the other 1, 2, 3. Okay, in base 64, how this will be configured. So this will be the value in base 64. I need to copy this in my YAML. Okay, so for
Okay,
example,
the base 64 values is always same for this particular word, right?
yes, if you are trying to execute for Ashfaq, this will be the same. For example, let me use again. See, same value. Okay, if I'm trying to execute for Saber, okay, see, this will be the same value what we have seen before. Okay. So
Okay.
always try to check this in base 64 and then copy this value. Do not copy the name directly. If you are trying to copy name, what will happen? It will throw error. Okay. So now we have got our value. Okay, and we have got our variable as well, right? See here, if you have one value, so this is base 64, and for password this is base 64. Okay, so for Saber this is what it will be printing, and for DevOps 123 this is what it will be printing. If you want to check, see, for DevOps 123, okay, this was in different machine when I have executed this. Okay, so you need to change these values what it is been executing in your machine. So instead of that, better go for dry run. Always use dry run -o YAML. So what will happen? It will display one sample YAML file, and that will make our work very easy. And then we can configure this YAML and create one YAML file. So even if I am trying to describe now what is happening, we are unable to see the value. See, kubectl describe, and then secret, and then secret name is literal. So what is happening? We are unable to see the value. We are just seeing the variable name is name, but there is no value over here. Okay, now the task is to inject this inside our container pod. Sorry, not container, pod. kubectl get pods. So do we have any pods? Yes. So let me delete this pods f1 all. Okay, the reason why I am deleting each and every time is because I don't want to edit my YAML file again and again, and I don't want to make these changes manually. Since we are testing continuously, I want my environment to be clean because I don't want any kind of configuration issues. Okay, or else we'll get stuck with the errors and we'll be wasting our time. Okay, so now let me copy this YAML file. Okay, so where is our first.yaml? Let me delete this file and then paste the new content. Okay, here if you see, same, I mean this is same, and here env, and then the value from secret, which value you want to configure. Here earlier what we have used, config map reference, no secret key reference. Okay, and the key what I want to store is password, and the name of the file is first. But in our case, everything is changed. The name of the secret is literal. Right, and the keyword what I have used to store my value is name. Okay, and basically this will be the variable what we can see inside our pod. Okay, so earlier what I have did, I have changed this to my same key name, right? So let me use the same name now. Okay, variable from secret. Okay, and if I'll hit enter and if I'll try to create one kubectl apply -f and then first pod.yaml, then we can see one pod has been created, kubectl get pods, then we can see one pod is running. Then if you want to check, how can we check? kubectl-exec-it and then the pod name, that is first pod, and then bash or else I can use directly env as well. It will print all the variables, right? So without logging inside the container, this will print all the environmental variables. So now if you see here, variable from secret and the name or the value was Sagar. This is how it is decrypted inside our pod. Okay, outside pod it was encrypted form, and inside pod we can see the value. The value over here is Sagar. And this is something what, which I mean, variable from secret is a name what I wanted to see. Okay, name. So try to make sure this name is similar to the key name what you are trying to, I mean the variable name itself. Okay, then it will be more easy for us to understand. Okay, so this is how we can see the usernames and passwords in encrypted way. So config maps, why are we using? To store any non-sensitive data. It can be database URLs or any application configuration details. Whereas secrets, we are storing for sensitive data like passwords, because we don't want to display our passwords, right? So you can say that we use secrets for password. How to create secrets or how to create config maps? We have 4 ways. One is from -f from -literal, okay, and then -f from -file, -f from directory, -f from -env-file. These are the 4 different ways how we can create our config maps or secrets. And how can we inject? We can inject either in terms of variables or we can inject in terms of file. Okay, so I have given all the examples how to inject multiple values, how to inject secrets, all values. Okay, env from what we have seen in config maps. Okay, how to inject secret as files, how to inject specific variable as files in pods. Okay, so with this we are good with secrets. If you have any questions, then let me know. Okay, and then we'll try to wind this up. We have one more concept, taint and tolerations, and we have node selectors, we have node affinity, and we have volumes. So hopefully I will try to cover this in next session. I will try to stretch next session for at least 2 hours, because as of now there is no power, and I don't think so the backup will be existing more. Okay, so we'll close with this. If you have any questions, then let me know, or else we can wind up. Let me stop this recording.